let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolutely fascinating ways American communities have kept their historic mid-century atmospheres alive in our super fast-paced, modernizing world. We're going to be looking at a very specific, almost magical phenomenon, the survival of the classic American Main Street. Because let's be real, when you think of modern America, your brain probably jumps straight to towering glass skyscrapers, sprawling suburban neighborhoods, and those massive digital billboards. But hiding just off the interstate, there are these towns that have seemingly defied time itself.
It's a pretty jarring, honestly beautiful contrast when you actually experience it. Picture this. One minute you're navigating the America we all deal with every day, the endless highways, the giant concrete malls, the bumper-to-bumper traffic, and then you take an exit, step out of your car, and suddenly you're on a street that looks like it was ripped straight out of 1950. We're talking old brick storefronts, classic neon theater signs, and local diners. And the craziest part? These aren't artificial tourist traps or Hollywood movie sets. They're real, functioning communities where actual pieces of the past have genuinely survived the bulldozer of modern development.
So let's get into Section 1, the two Americas, highway speed versus Main Street pace. We are looking at towns that aren't just holding on to a cute aesthetic, but real living places where the architecture and the literal pace of another generation have actually survived. Which brings us to Section 2, preserving the past, accidental time capsules. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that a lot of these towns held onto their history totally by accident. They didn't necessarily sit down with some grand master plan to freeze time. It's more like their unique geography, combined with a much slower pace of economic development, just naturally shielded them. They simply grew slowly enough that modern construction never completely wiped out the old stuff. It's wild how quickly we can categorize these preserved towns based entirely on the specific local industries and raw physical landscapes that originally shaped them. Take Cody, Wyoming, for instance. It leans 100% into its Western frontier heritage. You've got these incredibly wide streets and architecture that perfectly reflect the open, rugged landscapes all around it. On the flip side, you look at a place like Hannibal, Missouri, and it's shaped almost entirely by the Mississippi River, holding on to that classic early 20th century riverboat vibe. The geography and the original local economies, they are permanently stamped right into the architecture. So instead of tearing down the old brick to make way for, massive concrete parking lots, these communities ended up protecting the very structures that tell their founders' stories. Bisbee, Arizona is a perfect example. It's literally tucked away in the mountains. Because it was built super compactly for miners on really steep terrain, it has this incredibly weird, wonderful layout full of old, winding stairways. It survived simply because you physically couldn't build endless sprawling suburbs on those cliffs. Similarly, Galena, Illinois managed to keep its cohesive 19th century brick streetscape entirely intact, giving it this incredibly cinematic feel today. And McKinney, Texas hits the nail right on the head here. Imagine people walking out of a restaurant built generations ago while swiping away on the latest smartphone. McKinney is fascinating because it sits right on the edge of Dallas, a city literally famous for its massive, sprawling highways. Yet McKinney's historic downtown is fully, beautifully intact. Modern businesses just moved right into the older buildings. It's this awesome surreal mixture where a brand new electric car might drive past a brick storefront that has stood since before the driver's grandparents were even born.
All right, moving on to Section 3, museums and unique outliers, curated history. We've talked about accidental preservation, but let's see what happens when keeping the past alive is a highly deliberate act, or when it's strictly shaped by unique cultural rules. Take Greenfield Village in Michigan. This place specifically answers the question, what did everyday American life actually look like on a local level before giant supermarkets totally took over our daily routines? It's a massive outlier because it's essentially a giant outdoor museum. Historic buildings from all different periods were physically relocated and brought together here. The real takeaway is the sheer scale of the place. We aren't talking about a single historic house you tour in 5 minutes. It's an entire, immersive environment that lets you actually feel the highly localized world of early America. Meanwhile, down in Texas Hill Country, you've got Fredericksburg. This town proves that America isn't just a single monolithic culture. They deliberately preserved their deep German roots, not just in everyday life, but in the local architecture. It's a prime example of how immigration permanently established traditions that were literally built into the brick and mortar of the town. It really highlights a beautiful truth about America. You have communities with completely different, vibrant cultural backgrounds coexisting right in the same country. Zero. Yep, absolutely zero, that is the exact number of everyday automobiles you will find rolling down the streets of Mackinac Island, Michigan. The entire town relies exclusively on bicycles and horse-drawn carriages. Talk about strict preservation rules, right? By completely banning cars, Mackinac Island practically forces you to experience the pace of a community the old-fashioned way. You walk, you ride, and it hits you. You suddenly realize just how much of our modern American life and our entire modern landscape has been dictated by the automobile.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Leavenworth reinvention, faking history to survive. So we've seen accidental preservation and strict curation, but what on earth happens when relying on the past just isn't an option, and a historic town is staring down the barrel of absolute economic ruin?
That brings us to Leavenworth, Washington, a Pacific Northwest town that had to answer this terrifying question. Imagine you're a local leader in a town built totally around the logging industry. When the timber runs out, your economy collapses. The town usually boards up its windows, people leave out of sheer desperation to find work, and the town's history just slowly decays into a ghost town. That was exactly what Leavenworth was facing. Their lifeblood was gone. But instead of just throwing in the towel and fading away, the local leaders pulled off something incredibly bold. They collaborated to completely, radically reinvent the town's identity from the ground up. They knew they couldn't cling to a logging pass that was no longer economically viable, so they looked around at their stunning geography, the Cascade Mountains, and they had a light bulb moment. They realized, hey, these peaks look an awful lot like the Bavarian Alps. And boom, that visual resemblance sparked a crazy, brilliant idea. They decided to transform their dying logging town into a Bavarian village.
They literally imported an entirely new heritage. They didn't just hang up a couple of banners. They completely overhauled the physical look of the whole town to feature Bavarian architecture and European-style designs. They started hosting Oktoberfest and other massive local festivals, all cleverly capitalizing on those surrounding mountains. They manufactured a brand new history from scratch just to attract visitors. And the crucial thing to remember here is why they did it: survival. It was an incredibly creative survival mechanism to save their local economy from total collapse. And this right here perfectly illustrates a huge takeaway for us today. Sometimes, historic towns survive not by stubbornly holding on to what they used to be, but by finding a totally new way to make their history, even a manufactured one, valuable. Leavenworth survived because it refused to just passively wait around for the end. They changed literally everything, and in doing so, they saved their community. Now, it's a thriving, living town that still operates at that wonderful, slower Main Street pace, just with a slightly different architectural flavor. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Main Street's Future, the Memory of America. As we wrap up this explainer, let's take a step back and look at the broader picture. Because honestly, whether a town accidentally preserved its bricks, strictly banned all cars, or completely reinvented itself as a fake Bavarian village, they're all pointing to the exact same underlying truth. These restored downtowns are an amazing reality check. They remind us that before the era of one-click online shopping and giant suburban megamalls, the historic Main Street was the true beating heart of the American community. Think about what makes these places special: a solid courthouse sitting right in the center, the historic theaters, the local bakeries where everyone knows your name, the classic diners. These weren't just commercial spaces. They were the absolute center of gravity where generations gathered, worked, and celebrated life together. When communities restore these old buildings today, they aren't just saving some old brick and mortar. They're actually reviving the social soul of their towns. So here's a thought to leave you with. The next time you're on a road trip traveling across the country, maybe take the smaller road. Discover that living memory of America for yourself. The past and the present really do exist side by side, totally intertwined in these amazing time capsules. You just have to be willing to take the exit off the massive interstate. Which kind of makes me wonder, what incredible piece of history is hiding in plain sight, maybe just a few miles off your everyday commute?